Welcome to the Amphibian Press podcast. I'm Sara, and with me today is Matthew Phillion, and he's the author of the Instructables, which is a young adult superhero series. So I was super excited when I first saw your series in our inbox. Marissa beat me to it. I'm not like a huge fan of superheroes like the traditional ones, because I can really see myself in those types of characters. But I really like the twists that you've done with the genre. So for those who aren't familiar, can you tell us a little bit about the series?
Sure. It's I always say it's about a group of rookie heroes kind of bumbling their way through figuring out how to do their job and save the world. They're a group of young mostly superpowered characters who get recruited to replace a generation who didn't die, they didn't fall apart, they gave up. Like the older guys just kind of ran out of steam and went, this is not a world that we can save. And these are my hopeful characters. I'm like, well, we'll give it a shot instead. And not really particular and they get better as the series progresses. One would hope they would, but that's sort of the concept of them accidentally figuring out how to be the best they can and leave the world better than they found it. And it came from wanting to be, I grew up loving superheroes, but not knowing how to approach them differently. And they're as a very cynical person, they're my ray of sunshine in my life. This is kind of how I wish I could look at the world. So that they're and I try to keep it lighthearted and fun and not heavy. I grew up in sort of like the dark period, like cynical superhero genre, and I'm like, they're wearing primary colors, man. Let's have fun with it. So that's kind of my elevator pitch is that they're just sort of bumbling their way to saving the world that they have to live in.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, it's true. It's like, how serious can you be when you're wearing your underwear outside your pants for your uniform? And I like that with so much going like grim dark, like most of the genres like fantasy sci-fi, it's all grim, and which is great and has a place because you look outside your window and there it is. But with superheroes, I think it really hits home when you're not afraid of like your source material, so to speak. Yeah. It's like, don't be ashamed of it. It's like that's part of the genre, and not something to be avoided. So what was your you spoke a little bit about your inspiration, but what was your inspiration for your characters themselves? Because you got like a whole great cast. So.
Well, it's funny because I grew up when I was a kid, I wanted to write superheroes, and then I said, no, you're not allowed to do that, and go be a serious writer and write, try to write the great American novel and all that other stuff and put that stuff on the shelf. But I had all these character concepts in the back of my head for years. Like it was almost like cheating. Like I had these characters that had been kind of like taking up a spot in like the back room for, since my teens. Some of them that long, some of them more recently, but and they just been kind of ruminating back there. And I'm like, well, maybe someday. And when I finally gave myself permission to write something fun after all these years of trying to be dead serious, and trying to write something literary, or I wrote romantic comedies for a while, like just adult writing for grown-ups, I guess would be the way to put it, right? And when I finally gave myself permission to write this type of thing, I'm like, well, do you want to do this character or that character? I'm like, well, what if we just throw them all in the room and see what happens? And when I put them all together, I'm like, I like this, I liked the dynamic of the whole gang. And so I didn't have a story. I just had a bunch of characters that I had been thinking about, the younger character who can control gravity, and a solar powered girl. And I've always wanted to, I had a funny side story. One of the characters is a werewolf because there's always a werewolf. And I had been watching, what's it called? Penny Dreadful. And I thought to myself, man, I'd really love to write a story with a werewolf in it. And it was almost as if I had forgotten that I've written this entire series with a character who's a werewolf. And it's like, you've actually kind of fulfilled one of those life goals, Matt. You're actually allowed to like...
You can check that one off now.
Yeah, like you actually do have a story, 4 books actually with a werewolf in it. So that I just kind of threw them all in the room to see what would happen and where do they go. And that's sort of how the bumbling their way to saving the world kind of happened was, well, it's definitely a world that needs saving in a lot of ways. So what can I throw at these characters that I like having? I like their dynamic, and I like writing for each of them, and I like their voices. And that was sort of where the series started going. And I kind of had an idea of sort of what speed bumps I would want them to hit. But I'm like, you never know. Maybe nobody reads the first book, so I'll write it and see what happens with one story. And if people read it, then I'll write another one. But had that idea of taking that episodic feel of a comic book and translating that into a novel kind of feel. Plus, I can doodle, but I can't draw. So there was no way I was going to be able to draw. I was going to be able to do a comic book myself. That just wasn't happening. So I'm like, well, I can do words. So we'll do words and we'll do characters that I love and see what happens. So
that's neat. Now, it's set in a fairly contemporary world, correct?
Yeah.
Now, I know like a lot of our, the very well-known comics and superhero storylines have, they draw from real-world experience. I mean, I don't know how many World War II, settings we have for superheroes. How do you toe that line of like, this is our world, but also like avoiding certain things, or do you not avoid them?
I'm really cautious about, aside from, well, I have one character who she's a pop culture machine. Like, just, that was one of the running gags, is that she can find a pop culture reference in any situation, but it's almost like, exactly how much time did this child spend in front of the television where she can make a joke about like the 1960s Doctor Who versus like, a movie that just came out or whatever. And like, and does she do anything other than consume pop culture? But that was sort of my goal of making it timeless, that she can, instead of it just being pop culture references. Their main city that they live in, I never actually name. It's capitalized, the city. And I know, the first 30 pages or so, I'm pretty sure it was New York. And then it kept going. I'm like, well, maybe it's Boston. That's a city I know. And then I'm like, no, I think it's actually just this place that is a little bit Manhattan and a little bit Boston, a little bit Providence. And it's this sort of East Coasty kind of city that never gets named, but is somewhere situated in that world. So even geographically, I want that city to be able to evolve. And if something terrible happens to it, I don't have to then deal with, huge catastrophe happens in downtown Boston. How do I deal with that? And how does that impact the world? I wanted to make this one fictional location that if it has a massive life-changing situation, I can build that into the narrative without taking them out of the real world. And I might hit on themes, but I don't hit on actual current events, because we're always humans are always going to make the same mistakes over and over again, right? So I figure if I can hit on things that we do wrong that need to be fixed without actually naming specific current events, that will hopefully help with the longevity and hopefully mean it'll be relatable in 10 years too, as opposed to just right now. I always worry especially with pop writing, there's writing that is a period piece and should be of a time, but with this I kind of wanted to avoid locking. Let's talk about the themes of the world as opposed to the actual events, because I don't want to date it too quickly, because the world changes every 5 minutes, so
yeah. And I think it's easier too for readers, especially maybe of the younger sort of generation, to overlay their city. If they live in Boston or Providence or wherever, they can overlay that on the city, and it fits. And I think that's sort of a draw too of just young adult as a genre, because we're all, like, even if we're not kids anymore or teenagers, we're still dealing with so many of those issues, because we never know what we're doing. So, and it's just more of that. So.
We never actually hit the point, that whole concept of adulting. I love when people get offended by it. I'm like, does any adult actually know what they do? I know 60, 70-year-old people who are like, I still don't know what I'm doing. We just wing it until we get through it. So
if they say they do, they're lying.
Oh yeah.
So now your newest installment, which is a spin-off, which is Roll for Initiative.
Yep.
I love the title, by the way, because I also do role-play gaming, and just that like adrenaline rush that you get when your DM is like, okay, roll for initiative.
Yep.
As soon as I read that one. So tell me a little bit about that and how you worked role-play gaming into your writing, which I think is a neat crossover.
It was a really funny thing, because I had been the fourth book was all set, and the fourth book in the main series was sort of, okay, if I have to end it, I can end it here. I'm not done with them. I'd like to do more, and I was in the process of, do I change publishers, or do I Shop Talk, I own the rights to the characters, but they had first publishing rights. So like, do I want to stick with the same publisher, or do I want to do something else? And I had a very amicable relationship with the publisher, but I just wanted to do something kind of separate that didn't necessarily rely on the main series. And I'm enthralled by how like it's okay to be into RPGs now.
Right.
People are playing Dungeons and Dragons on Twitch. Like, what is going on with this?
I love that. Yeah.
Like, it blew my mind. And so I had that on my mind. I look at these characters and like, they would totally play. Well, 3 out of 5 of them would. One of them would be convinced, and one would be dragged kicking and screaming, but they could get around a table. And I wanted something that was outside the main continuity. So I had an idea of, and I do one shots. I do these little like side stories. They're stories that might not fit into the main continuity of the books. It's tough writing novels versus comics. Like, you can do a little one shot story in a comic and have it not impact the flow of the story, but you can't do these little sidebars in a novel and without you got to really kind of make it work for the overall structure. So I've been doing these little digital shorts, and I'm like, well, I'll just do a digital short about how they get, they find a cursed, it's sort of a mashup of D&D and like Descent or something like that, like sort of a board game / role-playing game. And the minute they roll the dice, they're stuck in the game. And what happens when a bunch of superheroes get stuck in a game and can't use their powers, but suddenly like, okay, so you're a wizard, what do you do with this information? And I'm writing it, and I'm like, okay, this is definitely not a short. And I keep going. I'm like, okay, it won't be a full novel. It could be, but I think it'll be a novella. And then finally I'm like, okay, so this is, it's definitely like a side story for them, but it is a full novella that needs to be, in print. I can't just throw it up on a website somewhere. It's got a life of its own. And I just had a blast writing it, because they were, instead of saving their own world, they were forced to be friends playing a game for an entire story.
Mm-hmm.
And people have responded to it so well that I'm like, but they have a real world to go back to. I have to send them home. What do I? But I kind of like them here. I kind of like their dynamic of them outside of their element. And it really was supposed to just be almost like a lark. I'll throw this almost like a throwaway story for like a gift to the fans. Like, here, you'll have some fun with this, and I'll have fun writing it, but it won't actually have a huge impact on the story. And it just kind of got a life of its own. It got to the point where I actually ended up spinning off a set of novellas about the same game, because you figure if there's a game out there that they get trapped in, it can't be the only one, right? There's copies of that on shelves everywhere. And I've got a set of novellas about what happens if regular people do this, get stuck in the same game, and instead of wanting to go home and save the world, they like where they are in the game better than their actual life. Mm-hmm. And so that the Dungeon Crawler series is sort of like this little side project that I've been working on, because I wasn't done with the world after the Instructables went home. Mm-hmm. I'm like, I want to spend more time in this world too. I need to go work in that world. But and it was never intended to be a book I could put on a shelf. It was supposed to be a little digital, like, one-off, like just sort of roll it up in your pocket and stick it in and pass it around. And I love this. This is one of my favorite books in the entire series, because it's them being friends, and then the comedy of having one of the characters has virtually no sense of humor and no interest in play. So to have her at the table, and the one time she actually takes a break from life to play a game, she's like, and of course we get the cursed game where we're stuck in, instead of just actually, like, although I'm pretty sure if we look at these as real people, she would be the character who would prefer to be playing a monk in Dungeons and Dragons for real than playing one at a table and like, okay, so we're just rolling dice now. Like, I don't actually get to punch anything. So yeah, it was totally meant to be. And it was almost like I know you guys are waiting for a 5th book. Let me get something little out for you. And instead it was like, I love this and I want to write this all the time. And I might send them back someday. Yeah, so.
That's fun. And I mean, the best part about being an author is you get to like write your own fan fiction about your own characters in some ways. And it's like, I think that's where spin-offs start for most authors. It's like, oh, I don't want to say goodbye to this character yet, or this, this world or whatever. And I guess I'll stick around for a bit.
It's funny that you call it, because I actually think that's the best definition of Roll for Initiative I've heard. It's my own fan fiction of my characters. I think you've just nailed on the head exactly what that book is.
My friend and I, we share a universe with two of our series, and we were just talking about like setting up the timeline and figure, like you said, like trying to figure out a way to make it not mess up the big overarching plots. And but the fun part is like as you're doing it, you're like, oh wait, but what about this? And it starts to fit almost even better than it did before. And it's like, oh, there's a reason for it.
Yeah, it's funny how everything kind of falls together. There's a second spin-off to the Instructables. It doesn't actually have a series name because I never thought it was going to be a series. I thought, well, like it was a couple of characters I couldn't squeeze in to the Instructables. Like 5 characters and a mentor is already a pretty big cast for people to get used to and deal with. So I didn't want to overwhelm them. But I'm like, I've got this, I've got an Atlantean character, and I've got the son of an Amazon, and all these other characters that I wanted to play around with. And like, well, I'll throw them in this other thing. And it's almost been, as I'm working on that series, like I've got an established universe over here. I can't have what they're doing mess up the flow, or I don't want to change the continuity, like, oh, they were doing this at the same time, but it almost naturally happens when you're working in a shared universe. The puzzle pieces find a way to fit together, even if they weren't intended to in the first place.
That's all entangles.
and then I was going to say, and then having the side world of the roll for initiative, like game world, like that's so separate, like that is in another little pocket universe. I can have anything happen there. And as long as people go home at some point, it's okay. So.
That's the idea. I love that the superheroes are taking a break from their superheroing by playing a game, whereas like most of us, when we go to play role-playing games, it's like I'm gonna save this world because I can't save mine. It's like a role reversal there.
You'd almost want them to take a break and play a board game that's like Life or something,
right. Like Catan, for God's sakes.
Exactly.
So do you have this huge cast and obviously all these spin-offs. Do you have a favorite one? This is like one of my favorite questions to ask people because it's like such a taboo thing.
It's funny, like you're not supposed to tell people you have a favorite child. Like, right. I don't really have a favorite. The second one is really my favorite.
Sorry, Timmy.
I know, right? It's funny. Well, there's the ones that I have the most fun writing, and then the ones that I connect with, and it's changed over the years. Like everybody, I've seen reviewers be like, clearly this is the author's favorite character. And I'm like, no, I don't really have an ultimate favorite. There are ones that are more fun. Like when I write Entropy Emily, who's the pop culture character, and at one point I had her writing, I'd written everything she was doing was in the pattern of You Ain't Nothing But a Hound Dog. And she's hassling the werewolf by delivering her entire set of dialogue in the pattern of, without actually quoting, because you can't quote songs, right. But You Ain't Nothing But a Werewolf. And I'm just sitting there in my office, like tears in my eyes. I'm entertaining myself so much by writing this character. But then writing the dancer, the very serious one, who I define as what if Batman were a ballet dancer who got injured and decided to use that determination for a different factor. I've always had fun writing someone who, and people seem to connect with her a lot too, because it's we're always trying to be better than what we were yesterday. Although the longer it goes on, I've actually discovered that there's only one character that I know I want to write as an adult. Like the others, I'm enjoying writing them as kids. And it's the werewolf character Titus that, like, I know where he goes, and it's very strange that I'm like, I want to write him now as a kid, and I want to write him as a 40-year-old character doing something else. Like I already know where he goes, and that was not my favorite character to write at first because I struggle with. He's a werewolf with anxiety issues, right? So that's sort of he's a character with barbs to begin with, and sometimes the characters with barbs are hard to connect with. But the longer I've written them, like I think at the end of the day, 4 books and a bunch of spin-offs later, I'm like, I think he might be my favorite now. He wasn't my favorite all along, but it's evolved over the years of writing them. That which one has been like my pet favorite. I still like writing Emily because anytime you can have a character who's basically there to harass and make your other characters uncomfortable, that's a lot of fun to write. So.
I love the little side characters who are just like, they needle people and they make things ultimately, I mean, not totally more difficult, but like on the small scale more difficult, because it's like, it's almost as if they're the author causing plot holes or whatever for the other protagonists.
And what's funny is I've noticed that people will pick up on social media, you're talking like Emily, and it's like, actually that's just me with a lot of caffeine. Like I actually a male reader my age, like or late 30s, early 40s, asked me once, like, is it strange to you that the character that you seem to have the best connection with is, a 15-year-old girl? And I'm like, I didn't really feel awkward till you pointed it out to me, and now I'm wondering, like, that's just my personality. But it's the energy that she brings to every scene that I really like. And if I'm struggling with a scene, if I put her in there, things happen, which is the best thing that you can have for characters. Is there a catalyst, whatever chemistry set you're working with at the time, you can throw them in and have fun with them. So yeah, I have favorites, and it varies depending on the time, on the point in which I'm working on the project. So but yeah, I do play favorites a little bit. I don't like to admit it.
We all do it. So just sort of like going on a brief tangent here. Superheroes aren't your only thing, because you mentioned your romantic comedy and whatnot. Now you had a film which was Certainly Never, and that was nominated for several awards in the Massachusetts Independent Film Festival in 2013, right?
Yep.
So what was that like? That's like totally different world, sort of from the online writing community now.
Oh, it's funny because I was a filmmaker right before, and it's interesting how accessibility has changed for both film and for novel writing. When I first started off as a writer, it was impossible to do either. You either needed to find that one agent as an author that could help you get in the door, or you needed, as a filmmaker, you need to have the right connections, because it costs so much. Just even as an independent filmmaker, it would cost you $30,000-$40,000 just to buy the film to create. And in the race to accessibility and to sort of, letting regular people become artists and succeed, film kind of won first. Like the digital revolution happened. But I like to write adventure stories and everything else, but I also like writing about human beings being human beings and making bad decisions. And it's really more what's the word I'm looking for, more affordable to write about regular people. And so I'd written a couple of screenplays, and I looked at Certainly Never and went, I could direct this, because I was an actor too, not a particularly great one, but I'd been on a bunch of film sets, and I kind of, it's learning by watching. And the more I think I was on something like 18 film sets in 12 months, and I'm like, okay, so I've seen every mistake you can possibly make. I know how to work with actors because I've been one. I've written the script, I feel connected to it, and I think I could direct this film. And I'd made all these contacts. Mm-hmm. I want this guy as my cinematographer if I ever shoot a film. I want this person to do the audio if I ever do. I had found every crew member that and it was just, it wasn't so much a Rolodex as like, these are people I trust to make art with. So I got the stupid idea of doing it. We did it. We shot it. The running joke was, is this a swearing podcast or a non-swearing podcast?
Oh, I swear all the
Okay.
time.
We're shooting on digital, and we had a very strict time limit to get this one scene done, because the person who owned the location was moving, so we can't go back and reshoot this location. And I'm kind of like stomping my foot, like, we got to shoot the scene. And the cinematographer turns around and he goes, my goal for this film is I really want it to not look like it was shot on digital. I want it to look like it was shot on film, like on hard film. And I go, you want to know what my goal is for this film? And he looks me dead in the eyes and goes, to finish the fucking film. And I'm like, that's all I really want. I want to finish the project. But yeah, we shot it. It took 3 times longer than it should have to edit, because that's what films do. And then it was the best part about it being nominated was it was nominated for the things that had the least to do with me. Like, it was nominated for, like, 3 out of the 5 actors were nominated for their performances. And I'm like, good, not like, that's them. Like, that's what they brought to the table. It was nominated for sort of a general, like, best local or best New England film or something like that, which was good. But I knew we wouldn't take that award home. I was really more hopeful for the cast. But it was a trip, and it was empowering, and it was terrifying, and I lost like 15 pounds out of pure anxiety. And it led directly to writing the Instructables, because when you shoot a film, you've got, somewhere between like 10 and 40 people counting on you to get it done. And after that, and it was nominated for awards, but it didn't get picked up by any distributors. It didn't make any money in at the end of the day. And I'm like, and I felt like I'd let the cast and crew down by not having this be like, this is what's going to lead to your Oscar.
Right.
No, it's not. And so I said, I just want the next project to be something that if it doesn't succeed, that I'm the only one that's let down. Mm-hmm. And I rewatched a bit of it the other day. And I'm still super proud of Certainly Never. I love that film. But it just didn't succeed in the way that I was hoping for them. I got a finished product that I think looks beautiful and makes people laugh and makes people cry, and it was exactly what I wanted, but it didn't financially succeed. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, okay, the next project I do, if it, in my mind, bombs, but in really what I mean is if it doesn't blow the world up, I'm the only one who's let down. And so I wrote the Instructables because I'm like, and I also want to write something where budget doesn't matter, right? Because after shooting a romantic comedy with 5 actors and 10 sets and changing locations, okay, so we can't shoot at a zoo, so here's some more affordable options. We'll shoot on a farm instead of a zoo for this one scene for no reason. It was like, okay, I'll write something where nobody else is depending on me, and nobody else is gonna be heartbroken if it doesn't work out. And also, I'm not sitting there trying to figure out how to afford to shoot on location for something, where pyrotechnics are allowed because we don't need insurance to write the pyrotechnics into a novel. You don't need, the fire department to be alerted or anything. Yeah, it was the best couple of years of my life, really, until the books became sort of a thing too. It was just, it was a hell of an accomplishment, and I was so proud of what it came out like. But and it wouldn't have happened if the world hadn't moved on and made it possible for indie filmmakers to make really professional, beautiful films without having a big studio behind them.
So you don't have plans to pursue film with the Instructables then?
Oh, well, I wouldn't shoot it myself. I would, if somebody wanted to make an Instructables movie, I would chase them down the street with the book, just take it, you can have it. But the idea of me actually doing it is not even remotely on my radar. That's, yeah. I mean, and there are days I want to go back to film. I miss it because there's a loneliness to being an author that you don't get on. I mean, on film sets, you also want to strangle people on a daily basis because you're all in each other's faces all day, and people get grumpy and cranky, and we spend too much time together. But I also miss having the people of a film set where everybody's there for the same goal. Whereas with when you're writing a book, especially if you're a solo author, it's might hear from the editor once in a while.
But yeah, you're stuck in your own head. The only person who strangles you.
Yeah. And everything. And the good and the bad part is the only one you have to blame is yourself. There was a day on set where I caught the sound guy and the cinematographer were huddled over a MacBook in the corner. What you doing, guys? Nothing, don't worry about it. I'm like, you tell the director don't worry about it, I immediately know I should be worried about it. What happened? Yeah, you have just hit the red anxiety button, and it the alarms are going off. What happened? No, it's nothing, it's fine. I'm like, just tell me what's going on. He's like, okay, so we lost all the audio from yesterday, but we think we have it somewhere. And that was what got me. We think we have it somewhere, and I'm like, that's something I need to worry about. You got to tell me, because I got to reschedule reshoots if we don't have it. But it was just the very conspiratorial, looking over their shoulders. And I was legitimately but that's part of the thing. I want to strangle him, but they were also looking out for my mental health too. If we can solve this before he even knows about it, we don't have to watch him leave set to go to a liquor store to go. So yeah, I mean, I would love to be back on a film set if the books ever got to the point where they were self-sufficient. Because right now it feels like the books are all day, all the time, every waking moment. I'm still sitting on scripts that I would love to take a crew out and shoot someday. That I would absolutely, in a New York minute, go back on a film set. It's just that you got to feed the beast that's feeding you too, in a way,
Oh yeah. So we talk about spin-offs and stuff. what's next for you and for the Instructables? What books do you have in the works right now?
It's actually going to be like a lunatic year, because I've got the sequel to the spinoff. Echo in the Sea was the spinoff about Atlantis, and that'll be out any day now. Got the final proofs. So first or second week of February, I think that should be out. And I'm super psyched about that because I didn't know if that was going to get a sequel because, do people want a spinoff or do they just want more of the Instructables? And I actually got kind of shellacked at Comic-Cons last year for not announcing a sequel to Echo. I'm like, oh, so people actually want it? And it was like having permission. Like people, you actually liked the sequel? Like, okay, then if you're saying go for it, I'll go for it. And I'm about halfway through the manuscript for a fifth Instructables book. We relaunched the entire series end of last year. New covers, just updated the whole thing. And I didn't want to do the fifth book until that was settled. And now that that's all good to go, we'll have a fifth one. I believe the working title is The Crimson Child. That may change, but that's what I'm calling it for now. And I'm psyched to get back in with that with the kids. I missed writing them. It's been the first four books came out really fast, and there was almost no space between them. And now I've had some time to kind of ruminate, and I'm looking forward to that. And then the Dungeon Crawler novellas they're fun to write in between the bigger books because they're all much shorter. Digital only. I want to do a print collected edition this year if I can, because people like to have something in their hands. So there is possibly going to be 3 actual like physical like real books this year, because last year last year was very digital heavy. Roll for Initiative started off as digital only. I didn't do a print version until I knew I had some live events coming up, and then the Dungeon Crawler series were all digital. And I had someone come up to me who'd been following the series, looks down and sees one novella on the table and just goes, "That's it?" And I'm like, "That's it?" I wrote 4 novellas this year. There's been something out every quarter, and I'm like, I gotta get. People do want the traditional things. I might, hopefully, if nothing gets derailed, I should have a new Instructables. I will definitely have Poseidon's Scar, which is the sequel to Echo in the Sea, out any minute. Which is, I'm so psyched about that because I didn't know if I was going to get to write the sequel to that. And then as soon as I can come up for air, I want to get a Dungeon Crawlers novella out because those are just light and fun, and I get to play around with D&D jokes covertly because I don't want to accidentally reference something that's copywritten, but right. Like you can make jokes. But the 20-sided die is definitely a universally beloved and hated piece of instrumentation. So yeah, I've got, this year should be pretty nuts, and I'm actually kind of on schedule, which is nice for a change to actually be pretty close to hitting every deadline I want to hit for 2019.
That's so awesome.
I'm psyched.
So obviously we can find your work on Amazon, and it's just Amazon right now, digitally, right?
And print. Currently, I changed publishers recently. Previously, it had been like everywhere, but with the transition, it's right now Amazon only. May end up being at Barnes and Noble and everything this year, but that's sort of up in the air. But yeah, the easiest place to find it is Amazon, ebook and print for everything except for the Dungeon Crawlers, which will have a, knock on wood, should have a collected print edition for the summer convention season too, if all goes according to plan.
Awesome. So where can people find you, both online and like what conventions are you going to be hitting up this year?
So far, I'm only locked in for Fan Expo in Boston and Terrificon in Connecticut. I'm hoping to do a bunch more because with the relaunch, I'm kind of psyched it's been kind of quiet with conventions the past couple of years because I've had so much kind of up in the air. So those are the 2 I'll definitely be at. And if anybody has a local one they want to recommend, I am all ears because I am trying to book out the second half of the year. I want to hit, and I usually stick to New England because books are heavy to ship to different conventions on the West Coast. But this would be the year I want to try to expand a little further outside of my comfort zone. It's been I've been very New England centric just because it's tough to. Yeah, it honestly, if you weren't shipping like 80 pounds of paper to the West Coast, it's a little simpler. And so face to face, those are definitely during the summer conventions here in New England, I'll be around. I'll be announcing. Honestly, I've got this gigantic spreadsheet over here off camera of like, which ones am I going to hit? Which ones are far enough apart time wise and geographically to make sure I'm not, stealing from one, the attention from one or the other.
Right.
Online, I'm on Twitter at Matt Phillion, where I go to stress myself out because that's what Twitter does to us, right?
Yeah.
I just feel like, why am I anxious right now? Oh, I spent 20 minutes on Twitter. That's why the world's giving me a panic attack. And where else am I? I'm also boring as authors can be on Instagram. I'm the same thing, Matt Phillion on Instagram.
Where's my computer screen again?
Mostly it's pictures of my dog, to be honest.
Okay,
It's my dog and occasionally broken up by photos of the books, but mostly it's Watson. And then my website's MatthewPhillion.com, where you can find out all about the books and the characters and stuff. That's sort of like the hub of, I should be a better blogger than I am, to be honest. Like I should be more active, but right, that's sort of like, well, if you really want to learn about the Instructaverse, which I didn't make up, one of the readers actually called it the Instructaverse, and I asked him if I could steal it. I said, I'm going to steal that if that's okay. Like, sure. I'm like, okay, Instructaverse works. Yeah, that's sort of the hub of the Instructaverse, where the new stuff about the books that are coming out will be announced and everything. So.
Awesome. Well, we'll definitely keep our eyes out for everything, and we'll put all the links to everything for our viewers and listeners in the show notes, so you guys can keep tabs on him too. And hopefully we'll see some more stuff from you soon.
Cool. And always open to talking bookshop, superhero shop, whatever anybody wants to harass me about. I'm all ears. So I hope to hear from you.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining us. And this has been the Amphibian Press podcast. I'm Sara Boris, and with me today was Matthew Phillion. So, thank you.
Thank you.